Hi, this is Real World Audio, and I'm circling back to the efficiency video on how to determine for yourself what is the approximate sensitivity of your loudspeaker in dB per watt meter. And you remember my video where I gave you a rough chart that gives you free air volume, and if you know what is the low frequency specification of your loudspeaker, then you can read out what will be the efficiency for your loudspeaker. But now the problem is that all of us, we can see and easily calculate what is the total volume of a loudspeaker cabinet, but how do we go on about determining what is the free air volume? And for those of you who haven't seen that video yet, or me talking about free air volume is basically the size of the lungs of the loudspeaker. And so it's not just a meaningless term that engineers are obsessed about. It is something really crucial, and free air volume literally means what is the lung capacity of that loudspeaker, and that holds true for human beings as well. So the way we produce sound and loudspeakers produce sound, it's exactly the same way. And if you have bigger lungs, then you can sing louder and you can sing deeper. And the physics of human voice, like whether you are a baritone, a basso, a tenor, or a soprano, and what is your lung size in relationship with that, will determine basically your sensitivity, how loud, how many dB you can sing at, what's the max SPI you can put out. So here it is, this is how you can measure it. So let's have a look at the Mirage, and I will look at the voice of Lancelot as well, and I will measure and show how I measure the free air volume of these. So basically what you need to do first is get an idea of what is their total volume that they occupy in your space. So basically you get a measuring tape and you measure the width, you measure the depth, and you measure the total height of your loudspeaker. If you measure it in centimeters, you multiply one with the other, with the third, divided by 1000, and you get how many liters the total volume is that it occupies in your room. So in the case of the Mirage, it's almost exactly 100 liters. It's a tiny bit more. It's basically 101 liters, but we can call it 100 liters. And now, how can I tell or estimate, because we are unable to perfectly tell exactly how much the free air volume is. We could, well, it would be really, really hard to tell that, but we can estimate it, and this is how you can estimate. The side walls take up a certain width. So because the walls have a certain width, it means that the free air, the free space behind your loudspeaker is the thickness less. So most loudspeakers have a 20 millimeter thick wall. That's a good ballpark. So if you don't know what your speakers are, you can start by measuring your width and subtracting 2 times 20 millimeter from the side. So basically whatever you measure minus 4 centimeters. And the same goes for the height. So it will be here too, 2 centimeters, 2 centimeters there as well, and the same thing for the depth. So here the front wall is like 2 centimeters, and the rear baffle is also 2 centimeters wide. And you also have to be careful, because if your loudspeakers are like the Mirages, so you have a grill on the inside, so you see that there's like a half a centimeter lip where you can put the grill, and you have to take this half centimeter from the calculations. So basically, whatever you measured for the depth of this sidewall, first you have to subtract the lip and then subtract 2 times 2 centimeters from it. And that is the internal size. So how much is the true internal depth of the loudspeaker on the inside. And now when you get that value, you will notice that if we do the calculations for the Mirage, I'm getting 65 liters for that. And that's not yet the free air volume, because when you see the drivers, what do they have on the inside? They have their magnet structure. The motor is behind that thing, and I have twice that. So the magnet structure is taking up space, which means that the free air volume will be less than that. And the bigger the magnet structure is for a driver, the more airspace it takes away. Also, loudspeakers have internal bracing. And when you have internal bracing on the inside, which is basically extra pieces of wood to strengthen mechanically the cabinet, and they can run on any sort of dimension, any sort of orientation, and they also take up air volume from the cabinet. Also, if you have like 2 drivers and you read in the brochure that each of them are working in their own space, it means there's an extra piece of wood, an extra piece of the chassis, chassis of the cabinet that's between them and runs across the entire length. So basically it creates 2 boxes on the inside. So if that's the case, you also have to subtract the volume that it takes up from the calculation. So, and also the crossover, it also takes up. So if you measure like 65 liters, as I did for the Mirage, now I am treating them as roughly somewhere between 55 and 60 liters free air volume. So 55 to 60 liter free air volume for a loudspeaker that is 100 liter in total volume, so which is a large floor standard loudspeaker. About a little bit over half of it is the free air volume. Now, if you read in the brochures that it's heavily reinforced, so it has heavy bracing, very big magnet structure for the motors, and maybe it's like a double wall construction, then it can mean that it even such like a giant size loudspeaker, then it really just have a baby lungs on the inside, and you will find that the lungs for even a big size loudspeaker can be closer in size to the lungs of a bookshelf speaker than the size of a big speaker. So that's why if, for example, you have an average loudspeaker, I would say, and it's a big floor standard, then the free air volume, the lung size, will be approximately 55% of the size of the total volume you measure for the entire outside of the cabinet. If it's heavily braced, heavily fortified walls, it can be like down to 40% or even less. So if you are getting something like a von Schweikert, then basically even though the total volume looks like very impressive and very big, but really it's like a medium-sized lungs at best. And that's why you see sometimes when you see like even bigger loudspeaker, but the efficiency figure that goes with it is very modest. That's the reason why that seemingly large loudspeaker has such a low efficiency, because the size of its lungs is tiny. So if you go for bookshelf speakers, if they have thick walls, then you will have even you might have even worse numbers of free air volume versus total volume. than what we see here. So basically, if you have a heavily built bookshelf, which is like strong walls, then 40% or maybe a third of its total volume is the free air volume. If it's a lighter cabinet, then it can be like 50 to 60% of the total volume is your lung size for that bookshelf speaker. For these big floor standers, I would say you will get a figure between 40% to 60% depending on how thick the wall of the cabinet is. And now we are going for this ultra large size cabinet. So for my voice of Lancelot, when I measure the all three dimensions, it's so this was 100 liters, and this big boy, he is 320 liters. So that's quite a considerable cabinet. And on the bottom you see that there's quite a big airspace, and that is part of its port. So this is already it's the port of the loudspeaker. So that's the port size is not part of the free air volume. Same goes for those guys. If you have ports in your loudspeaker, the size of the port and the air that's inside the port, that should not be counted towards the lung size, towards the free air volume, because that's already part of the port. So we need to take away that air which is part of the port. I need to take away the thickness of the walls, and here I have 1/2 inch thick cabinet. So the walls of this big boy are almost like half the thickness of the walls of the Mirage. So I'm getting very little volume taken up by the walls themselves. Of course, there's a little bit more volume taken up by the cone itself, because it's mounted behind the front baffle, so that's taking out a couple extra liters. Inside, I also have a baffle inside the cabinet that creates the inner fold of the cabinet. I have the frame structure. I do not call it bracing because its purpose is not to brace, it is to create a frame. So there's a frame structure that also takes away free air volume, and what I am left with is approximately 240 liters of free air volume inside the cabinet, which is more than 4 times bigger than what we have here. So basically, the lung size is what it counts when you measure the size of a loudspeaker. And if we just go by the physical size that they occupy in the room, this is 3 times as big as that. But when we look at the free air volume at the lungs, this is more than 4 times bigger than that baby boy there. So here the efficiency is much greater. So if you have a light cabinet, which is a live resonant cabinet, and a big size accompanying, here we have a 75% ratio of total volume versus lung volume, free air volume. So basically the moral of the story is the bigger your loudspeaker is, the percentage of air, the lung in the cabinet will be greater in proportion to the total size. So if you are talking about a bookshelf speaker, then you measure the total volume of the bookshelf, and the lung size is about half of that to a third of that. If you have a big floor stander, you measure it, and then the free air volume will be 60% or 60 to 65% if it has a relatively lighter cabinet thickness, so it's an active live cabinet, then you can go like 65%. But if it's a very inert, very heavily damped cabinet, you can go down to 50%. And if you are talking about a giant size like 300 liter volume cabinet, if it's heavily brazed, it can go down to 60%, but if it's light, it can go up to like 75-80%. So thank you guys for tuning in. I hope this helped everyone. Bye bye.